So hello, fellow Earthlings. This is Earthling 64554633728, and I saw Joe Rogan's podcast with Stephen Dubner. I think he's co-author of Freakonomics, that amazing book from whenever it was, quite a while ago. I think they had a second book, and they have a sequel that Stephen Dubner, I don't know if the other guy is the economist who co-wrote the book. I don't know if he is on the podcast. But in case you don't know it, Freakonomics is an amazing book. One of the things that they were suggesting in the book is that the reason why crime went down in America is because of abortion was passed into law. And that allowed a lot of unwanted babies to not be born, and that reduced crime. As well as they were talking about the fact that being a drug dealer is not financially more better than working at a fast food joint. It was interesting, very interesting book. The podcast, I don't know if I liked the podcast as much, otherwise I'd still be listening to it. But apparently Joe Rogan listens to it, and he's a fan of Stephen Dubner. So, this podcast, Joe Rogan and Stephen Dubner, to be honest, there was one part I thought was really interesting, where Stephen Dubner was saying that his father and mother had converted from Judaism on their own before they met each other. And they'd gotten married and raised 8 kids as Catholics, fervent Catholics. And his father's Jewish family had completely cut ties with him. And he didn't know any of this because his father died when he was young. And he didn't know any of this until he was in his 20s or something like that. And it doesn't stop there. He converted to Judaism himself. That is just, wow, amazing. Apparently his mother's family cut ties with his family as well, but they were not as devout Jews, so they weren't as strict in their distancing from his mother and his mother's family. So he never knew anything about his father's family. He didn't go into the details of why he converted to Judaism, and a couple other things. And in a way, it was a little annoying, to be honest, because this is a guy who has his own podcast, so he's used to asking the questions, and apparently he's not too used to answering them. So, there's a lot of times where he ended up interviewing Joe Rogan, asking him the questions. And to be honest, there's a couple of times in there when I was like, what am I doing listening to this podcast? Joe Rogan is amazing. When I went and looked him up, there was so much stuff to find out about him. I did not know that he was in MMA from way, way back. And I think it was, I can't remember what he was fighting in before he encountered MMA. And before, well, I guess around the same time when he was also doing comedy. I just thought he was this guy from that show with, what's his name? Michael J. Fox, was it? Yeah, I just thought he was this funny guy from Michael J. Fox. Then he was the host of Fear Factor, and then he was, hosting MMA fights. And to realize that no, he really was into MMA on his own before he was even into acting, and that he quit acting to be a comedian. I didn't even know that, but I already know that. So it's not like Stephen Dubner asked him all this stuff, but I'm just saying. But that was the stuff about Stephen Dubner's family. I found that to be really interesting. And one of the questions, I wanted to say one of the few questions that Joe Rogan asked him, and he answered straight off the bat was, well, that's not fair. But one of the questions that Joe Rogan asked him was, would he do that to his kids? And he's like, no, absolutely not. But, at the same time, he was like, I bet you I only heard about, my father. Like, maybe it is that my grandfather had a really, really good reason that, hey, this son of mine did such a horrible thing in converting to Christianity that, who wouldn't have cut him off? And he's right. Absolutely, 100% he's right. But I can't wrap my brain around it. And of course I can't because, I'm not coming from that point of view. But, I guess partly because he's Jewish, he became Jewish again, that he can see it from that point of view. But, and it was so funny, the way that his grandfather found out that I think he had moved his son's pants or shirt or some form of clothing, and a rosary fell out. And I'm just like, wow. And I believe his grandfather had a Shabbat, like a ceremony for the death of a family member, and he cut him off. And there was some other stuff in there that was interesting, but by and large, he was interviewing Joe Rogan. He was like asking him about banning certain things. I can't remember, and they talked about vaping and stuff like that. But honestly, I would have been more interested in things directly about Stephen Dubner's life than hearing Joe Rogan's opinion on different hypothetical situations that Stephen Dubner presented to him. And in light of the other podcasts that I'd seen, where there was a vaccine guy, and there was a guy speaking on the spread of the novel coronavirus, etc. Those were more, okay, let me get some more information from these. I don't really have to stop at any particular point. But Stephen Dubner's interview was so all over the place that I really didn't have something like, when I press pause, I'm immediately thinking like, there's no cliffhanger. There's nothing to get back to find out more about this, or if they talk about this especially interesting thing again, especially as Stephen Dubner was like not going to talk that much about how he converted, which would have been really interesting, and more about his family and so on. I mean, he did, but at one point, Joe Rogan was like, yeah, I like your podcast, I like this episode, I like that. And then Stephen Dubner's like, I have eight siblings or 7 siblings, and in no disrespect to my older brothers, but you would have made a pretty good older brother, even though you're younger than me. I thought that was like interesting. But another thing that I thought was interesting was at some point Joe Rogan apparently is he's walking a lot more, because this was more like a Joe Rogan podcast about Joe Rogan. Apparently he got an injury or something like that, and instead of running these days, he's walking. So he was talking about that, and he was also talking about the fact that he was on an all protein, or basically no veggies or anything like that, or carbs diet. He was eating eggs and bacon in the morning, and meat, chicken, whatever it is, during the day. And Stephen Dubner wanted to find out about if there had been any studies on any societies that had been meat-based societies. And Joe Rogan mentioned the Maasai, who consume milk. Is it milk, meat, and blood? I think it is. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think, well, it's certainly blood, and it's certainly milk, but I don't know about the meat. It probably is. And, Stephen Dubner was asking him, milk from what source? And I was like, well, hold on. You're a journalist, you're an author, and you wrote this, co-wrote this amazing book. You listen to podcasts, and you don't know about the Maasai? I mean, I was like, how can you not know about the Maasai? It's just a small thing, I suppose, but yeah. But he's a really knowledgeable guy. It's just that one was shocking to me that he wouldn't know about the Maasai. I mean, yeah, I guess I forget whether or not the Maasai eat meat, but I'm pretty sure they do. It's just in my head when I think about milk and blood, I know that explicitly because I was like, oh my God. But the meat part, probably because you can't just live off of milk and blood, I don't imagine. But Joe Rogan mentioned that, the Inuit as well, you don't get a lot of veggies in the Arctic. So, yeah, they were eating a lot of blubber and whale and seal and stuff like that. And from that, I do know that the Inuit do fare a lot better than other people with respect to a carnivorous diet. But I just thought that was kind of, I expect the smartest people to know everything about everything. I don't, and that's like, not really fair of me to expect that everybody would know everything about everything like that. But and Joe Rogan, as usual, I think, he brought up taking drugs, and Stephen Dubner was talking about the fact that he wanted to attain a certain feeling that Joe Rogan was talking about, and he wanted to know if there was a way of doing it without drugs. And then he was saying that he's not judgmental on drugs, but at first he was saying like he doesn't know why he's not interested in drugs, or he doesn't want to use them. And then he's like, well, I had actually a bad experience, and once you have an experience like that, and you're the type of person like me, you just look out for bad things to happen. And I think that was part of the reason why he was suggesting that Joe Rogan would have made a good brother for him, because he was saying that that's the kind of person that he's ended up being, a bit of, in my understanding, like a softie, not someone who would like toughen up and shake it off. On that note, I saw something that to me was pretty funny. One of these football players, and it might not be funny to you, but it was hilarious to me at the time. I'm over it now, but it was still hilarious. There was a little a statue of a football player, and its legs were broken off, and there's this big football player. He was screaming at it, shake it off, shake it off. I thought that was so hilarious. Like, shake it off, your legs are broken. How do you shake off your legs being cracked in half? But so basically, apparently Stephen Dubner is a bit of a softie, and he would have appreciated someone who could have toughened him up the way that Joe Rogan was talking about. Also, Joe was getting into how comedians riff on each other, and they make fun of each other, and they say mean things about each other, and it's so funny in the end. And yeah, that's a whole nother ball game, whereby I think I've mentioned it before, we forge men in fire, and as a result of that, they're not as soft as women. But it also means that we are dangerous because we are forged in fire, and I don't know that that's great. There's one guy that I had seen, like, his videos from Stanford, a professor, I think on is it sociology, and he used to study baboons, and he mentioned the fact that in one particular troop that he had studied for many, many years, the most aggressive baboons had gone over to a dump, a food dump, and apparently a bunch of them had contracted TB, tuberculosis, and that when they all died, because they all went there, the aggression of males in the troop died with them. And the smaller, less aggressive males, or the ones that remained, because they weren't allowed to go down there. You had to be badass to go down there. And you would have thought that new males coming into the troop would have changed everything, flipped the script. No, apparently in a short period of time of being in the troop, they realized, you don't have to be aggressive and mean and whatever. We're all chill here. And there's no need for that. You don't need to keep doing that. And they would just acclimatize to the new culture of the troop. And I thought that was amazing. And it makes you wonder, don't want to go too far here, but it just makes you wonder about bonobo chimps and regular chimps, and if something like that is what happened with them. Anyway, guys, wish me luck. You can like or unlike. You can comment, subscribe, and or share. Peace.